Greetings, travelers, and welcome back to Tales from the Enchanted Forest with your hosts, Fox and Sparrow.
Greetings, travelers. Welcome back. I'm so glad you can join us for the end of a trilogy.
Yes, this is part 3 of our series on the Trojan War, which was supposed to be 1 episode and then 2 episodes, and now we are on the 3rd one.
Very much like Peter Jackson Hobbit trilogy. We maybe could have done 1, but studio gave us budget for 2, and then they wanted a 3rd, so here we are.
And we kept going. We were like, there's lots of source material to pull from.
Yes, the only difference between the Hobbit trilogy is we had more info we can pull from, and we can genuinely make it longer with interesting content.
Yes, we could have an entire podcast just dedicated to the Trojan War, I think.
Probably. I imagine someone else has done that, and one of our listeners is going to send that to us right after this.
I would love that. I've listened to the Rest is History podcast, and they also did like a massive series on Troy, and they did it specifically on Helen of Troy, and I think they did it a couple of years ago, but then they had, Stephen Fry on, and there's just so much about Greek history and Greek mythology, and the Trojan War is the cream of the crop for me personally. So a lot of historians and scholars have covered the Trojan War, and I think it's genuinely because this is the cream of the crop of storytelling. Mm-hmm. We have love, we have war, we have violence, we have family legacies, we have generational trauma that goes deep, we have the gods interfering. I think this is like the culmination of everything that the legacy of the heroes and the gods has come to.
Yeah, it's got a crossover of a lot of different stuff. We got the heroes, we got the gods, we've got random nymphs involved at various places. We've got just everything you could want. And I think it's crazy too, because there is some, obviously a lot of the mythos about it is not real, but there was actually a war this was kind of based on. It's got kind of everything you want in that regard too.
Yeah, and then we could have another episode just on the archaeology of Troy and all of that, but we won't get into that. We're just going to focus on the story, because otherwise this will end up being a 4-part series, and I think people might be getting a little bit bored of hearing us talk about the same topic and being like, we'll get to the war in a bit. So if you've been with us this entire time, you'll know that part 1, we started with the House of Sparta, namely discussing Helen of Troy and setting the stage with the prophecy given to Thetis about their son Achilles. Part 2, we did a bit more into Trojan history and how Priam became the king of Troy, followed by the prophecy about his son Paris. Then we had to segue and do another deep dive into the house of Atreus to set the scene for Agamemnon, Menelaus, and Clytemnestra, and also for Helen. Basically, to sum it up, everyone is cursed, and not in a cute short-term way, but in a way that is so generational and in a way that runs so deep that we're still wading through the blood. But at last, we are finally at the war. A lot of different creators and sources focus on the war itself, so we are going to pivot back to Helen and Clytemnestra. We left Helen last time. Her and Paris were traveling to Troy, and we left Clytemnestra last episode plotting with her husband's cousin Aegeus about the sacrifice of her daughter. And she will play a big role after the war. But before we can end this, we have to go right back to the beginning of the Trojan War.
Of course we do. We have to always go back before we can go forward, right?
At least we're not going all the way to the start again. Imagine I was like, and before we can talk about the Trojan War, we have to go find this new family and their lineage.
And with that, dear travelers, Tales from the Enchanted Forest presents the final chapter of the Trojan War.
So now we're in Troy, and we're finally going to return to Helen. How does she feel about all of this? In the Iliad itself, Helen only really appears a few times, and she seems completely over it, to be honest. There is also a moment in the Capria, the epic that bridges the gap of information before the Iliad, where after the Greeks land in Ilium, Achilles wishes to meet her. And Aphrodite and Thetis, his mother, contrive a meeting between them, but nothing more is said of this matter, which is such a shame, because when I saw that little line, I was like, wait, why did they have a meeting? What did they talk about? Why did Aphrodite agree, given that she's been championing Paris's cause this entire time? And It's a little bit fascinating because in the Iliad, Achilles and Helen are the two that are the closest to the gods. They're the closest to divinity. Achilles, obviously, in a way that's, a hero. He's very masculine. But Helen as well has a lot of masculine energy. She makes choices. She makes decisions. She also goes up against the gods and curses them. And so we have these two divine children meeting. And we know nothing about it. And that's so annoying.
It's like, here's something really cool happening in the background, but we will just leave that off screen. I think it's kind of one of those things where they know no writer could do it justice, so they have to just leave it off screen or else it's going to get ruined.
Leave it to our imagination to be like, what did they talk about? What happened? Why did Helen meet him? Why did Aphrodite?
What do you think happened?
I don't know. Like, that's the thing, because it's not like Achilles went in fighting for Helen after that to be like, oh my God, I'm going to take Helen for myself. He was still fighting for Menelaus to get her back. I don't doubt that maybe Helen used her beauty to convince him to stay, but that wouldn't make sense with the timeline of she chose to go to Troy. It's very, very confusing. What we do know is that after this meeting, the Greeks want to leave Troy. They get there and they don't want to be there anymore. But Achilles restrains them. And the main reason why they want to leave is because the Trojans have set fire to a lot of the crop and to the animals nearby, and they've laid their siege. So it's basically impenetrable. They have no food. They were expecting to come and have like a kind of easy raid, but that didn't happen. Mm-hmm. The Trojans have also refused to give Helen back willingly. And so the Greeks are a little bit, I think they're coming around to the idea that this is going to be a long stakeout. And they're worried about where they're going to get food. And so they want to leave, but Achilles basically helps them drive off the cattle of Aeneas, son of Aphrodite, and start sacking the neighboring cities. Meanwhile, Helen is inside the city walls, and whether or not she went willingly, she starts to feel the full weight of the decision. And God, she hates Paris. She's such a Paris hater. I'm just like, why are you here?
I mean, I can't argue with her there. It's just like, gosh dang it, Paris.
Yeah, but the Iliad does make the argument that maybe she didn't go willingly because she does not like this man.
Yeah, I believe that. I believe that a lot.
So the very first scene where we see Helen in the Iliad is when Paris and Menelaus decide to duel. Well, Menelaus decides to duel and Hector decides that Paris is going to duel him as well. And this is a really big deal because they decide that whoever wins gets Helen and her treasures, and that's it. Like, this is the deciding factor. Like, this could be the end of the war as we know it. So in disguise, the goddess Iris goes to Helen as she is weaving a great tapestry. And on this tapestry, she's embroidering the ordeals of the horse-taming Trojans and the Achaeans. And these are ordeals that she feels very personally because they're enduring them because of her. Iris calls on her to come quickly because both of her husbands are fighting and the war might end that very day, that very minute. And the Iliad says, with those words, the goddess filled Helen's heart with yearning, warm and deep for her husband long ago, her city, and her parents. So she rushes out to meet the men on the wall. And all of the older men are on this wall because all the younger ones are down fighting. And the men, they call her a deathless goddess. They do agree that she's really, really beautiful and that, they can't fault her for it, but they wish she would go home, They're watching their sons die. They're watching their grandkids die. They're watching their daughters become widows. They're, really worried for the fate of Troy. And here's this woman who is beautiful, but they don't want to lose everything for her.
Yeah. Quick pause. This might be a dumb question, but Goddess Iris, I'm not as familiar with her. Who's she?
So Iris is the Greek goddess of the rainbow and the messenger of the Olympians. So she's primarily the messenger that sends messages from Zeus and Hera to mortals, and she will disguise herself before she does it. In the Iliad, we really see her helping Aphrodite, and we see her carrying messages to different members in disguise. And usually in this scene, when she's with Helen, she's disguised as one of Helen's sister-in-laws. So the people who are receiving these kind of messages from her, they don't recognize it's a god telling them to come.
Gotcha. But also Hermes is the messenger god as well,
yes.
Right? Like, he does that as well.
Yes, he does. He's the one with the famous boots.
I guess they have a lot of messages, so they need a lot of people to be, like, managing these things.
Yeah, it's like you can't have just one admin, you need to have lots of administrative assistants.
Right? Makes sense.
So Helen goes to join the men, and Priam calls out to her, and Priam is still just a shining example of a king. He tells her that he does not blame her for wanting to see her kinsman, and that the only ones to blame for this entire ordeal are the gods and not Helen. In response, Helen speaks of herself in very disparaging terms. Like, she's very, very, like, not self-deprecating, because that's too light of a term. She literally says that if only death had pleased me then, grim death, the day I followed your son to Troy, forsaking my marriage bed, my kinsman, and my child. I feel like that's a very obvious way of saying, I'd rather have died, you know?
Yeah.
It's not the answer you'd expect from a girl who's like love struck and she came here to be with Paris and she's in love with him. This is the answer of a girl who regrets everything.
Right? This is like, what have I done? What has happened to me?
So Priam does call her to his side, and he starts asking her questions about the men they see below, specifically her kinsman, right? So she answers all his questions, and she's very knowledgeable about the different men. He asks her about Agamemnon, he asks her about Odysseus and the rest, and she's able to answer all of his questions and give him lots of details about them. But while she's answering his questions, she's also looking for two warriors. There are two specific men that she's looking for, and she can't find. And these two are Castor and Pollux, her brothers. And she won't find them on the battlefield. And she starts to think maybe they're on the boats and they're so embarrassed about what I've done that they don't even want to come out to save me this time. Because remember, when she was kidnapped by Theseus, they came and got her. And they razed the entire city to the ground. So she expects to see them with the host, but they're not there. And they're not there because they're kind of dead. And I say kinda because they're not 100% dead, but they're also 100% not alive. So when Menelaus left Sparta initially to go to Crete, he left Helen, Paris, and her brothers back home. And her brothers were very, very, very busy plotting against their cousins. Okay, I don't remember how to say these names, but one of them is Idas and one is Lynceus, I think. So their story is these two, their cousins, have their own interesting stories and myths, and I read through them, but I'm not going to include them here. The gist of it is that Castor and Pollux stole their fiancés.
My guys.
Yeah.
No.
Literally stole their cousins' fiancés, and not in a nice way.
Is there a nice way to do it?
No, but like if they had fallen in love with the fiancés had fallen in love with Castor and Pollux instead, that might be one thing. But the fiancés really liked the cousins. And so they kind of ruined their cousins' love stories by, stealing their fiancés and having kids with them. And later, the cousins do make up. So the quartet, they make up.
Wow.
And they go on a cattle raid. However, Idas and Lynceus were very, they were still feeling the weight of having their fiancé stolen. And so they trick Castor and Pollux by saying that whoever ate most of the meat would be able to keep a larger share of the cattle. So Idas and Castor were supposed to eat one share, Lynceus and Pollux were supposed to eat the other share, but instead Lynceus finished his portion and then also ate Idas's super quickly, and so they won.
They could really talk to Loki about their eating habits and just how much they can consume.
So on this fateful day where the Prince of Troy is visiting, Castor and Pollux weren't even thinking about him, to be honest, because their cousins had just left Sparta, and they were going to go ambush them and take the larger share of the cattle back. Unfortunately, they ended up in a fight. Castor, so Castor and Pollux are like Clytemnestra and Helen in some regards. If you remember from episode 1, they were born from eggs. So Castor and Clytemnestra were born mortal, and Pollux and Helen were born divine as children of Zeus. So Castor is fatally wounded, but Zeus intervenes in time to save his son, Pollux, and he gives Pollux a choice. He says that he could give up half his immortality to his brother, and the two can spend their time between Olympus and Hades, or Pollux can keep his entire immortality and his brother will just die. Pollux chooses the first option, and he does give up half his immortality. So they are now if you look at the constellations, they're now the constellation Gemini. But obviously, Helen doesn't know this. She doesn't know that her brothers are half dead, half alive. She doesn't know where they are. So she just stares into the battlefield, looking for the brothers who once came to rescue her and realizing they're not there.
That's rough.
That's very rough.
Where's my family? Oh, they're just not here anymore, and they're not even fully dead, so I probably won't even see them fully in the afterlife either.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest I really feel for Helen in the Iliad because she feels the entire weight of this war in a way that Paris doesn't seem to. And I know the others don't fully blame her. The Greeks do blame her, and there are lots of times where the Greeks question why they're here. The Trojans wonder why they're fighting. Helen alludes a lot to the fact that her family, like the sister-in-laws and brother-in-laws, aren't always nice to her. But she feels the weight of what's happened. Whereas Paris just seems to be like, don't worry, we'll get over it. Like, I have Aphrodite on my side.
But you're pretty, so I'm going to be fine.
Yes. He seems very lackadaisical about the whole thing, whereas Helen is angry. And we see this anger. So if we go back to the battle between Menelaus and Paris, Menelaus is about to kill Paris when Aphrodite intervenes and takes Paris away to his bedroom.
Ugh.
Yes. This is so annoying to everyone involved. They're like, the Trojans are mad, the Greeks are mad. Everyone's wondering, where did Paris go? And then the goddess goes to Helen, obviously in disguise, and tells her to go to her husband. But Helen recognizes that this is Aphrodite, and she starts arguing with the goddess. Like, she's fully arguing with Aphrodite. And this is, I remember from episode 1, I said there's a line, there's like a series of things that Helen says to Aphrodite that I want tattooed onto my body because it's so diabolical. So she turns to the goddess and she says, "Mysterious goddess, why are you trying to lead me on like this? You are plotting, I suppose, to carry me off to some more distant town, to gratify some other favorite of yours who may be living in those parts. Or is it that Menelaus has beaten Paris and wants to take me back home, his loathsome wife, so now you've come here to try to lure me back to Paris?" And then she says, "Go yourself and sit beside him. Forget your deity, abandon Olympus, fret over him and pamper him, be his wife then, or at least his slave. I shall not run, for shame to his bed again. The Trojan woman would scorn me if I did, and anyway, my heart is full of sorrow." So she's basically saying, what more do you want from me? Are you going to take me off and get me, like, marry me off to someone else you know that you like? You go do it. You go be his concubine, his slave. You go to his bed. We don't often see heroes fighting with the gods. We don't often see basically anyone fighting with the gods and then not get, smitten right on the spot.
Right? I think from her perspective, she doesn't have much to lose at this point. So she's just like, what else can you take from me?
Yeah.
And she means it. And she also has a bit of divinity in her to kind of back up that claim in a way where she's just not like a random mortal. So it will take some level of effort to just remove her from the board. So it's really interesting, and good on her for just giving it back to Aphrodite, though I imagine she's not going to take well to that statement.
No, Aphrodite is very scary, and so it's interesting that Helen manages to survive or escape this. And this is why the theory that Helen was under some sort of love spell when she ran away with Paris is so obvious. Like, it's such an arguable thing because of the way she acts in the Iliad, is that she really cannot stand him. And the way that she says, "Are you going to carry me off to some distant town?" It makes it seem like she didn't want to be part of this in the first place. And Aphrodite reacts as you would expect Aphrodite to react. It's not great. She threatens to desert Helen and hate her so deeply that all of the Trojans and Greeks would hate her too. And then she adds, "Then indeed would your fate be evil." So if you remember from the first prophecy we had of Zeus, when he was kind of contemplating how to bring about the downfall of mankind, we had this idea that maybe Helen was created to be that evil, right? To be that kind of destruction. And so when Aphrodite says, "Then indeed would your fate be evil," it's kind of like reaffirming like, oh, it's already evil, but if you really want to have everyone hate you, I can make that happen. And Helen is scared. She's frightened about that, and she doesn't really have much to go off of. And so the idea that everyone would hate her does frighten her. And so she goes to Paris's bedroom, but she sits near the bed and she doesn't really look at him. And she tells him that she kind of wishes that Menelaus had killed him. And honestly, he should go back to the battlefield and fight like a man. And Paris is like, wife, don't bother me with such nagging. I'm having a really hard time. Okay, I almost died.
We're like, we know. We wish we had money on Menelaus.
Like, go back to the battlefield and fight. And
yeah,
so
be a man.
yeah, literally. So Helen does end up going to bed with him, but it's done in such a reluctant way that it's not, you start to feel like Paris is this petulant, annoying kid, and Helen has to appease him because of Aphrodite.
Ugh, jeez.
Yeah, it's just, Paris is so annoying. Every time I read about him, I just get so annoyed. And so Paris doesn't just have a bad reputation in the Enchanted Forest with us and with his wife, but he also has it with all of the other men. They all call him cowards. And compared to the hero Hector, you know, the shining bright light of Troy, Paris is such a disappointment. In one scene later on in the Iliad, Hector comes to curse out his brother, and Helen's like, I agree. And so she also curses him, but she curses herself as well. And Helen has such a soft spot for Hector that it's very endearing to see. And she says to him, you know, you are the one hit hardest by the fighting, Hector. You more than all in all for me. Whore that I am, and this blind mad Paris. Oh, the two of us, Zeus planted a killing doom within us both. So even for generations still unborn, we will live in song. And again, we see her self-deprecation. Like, she calls herself every name in the book. But it's this line that I really like. Zeus planted a killing doom within us both. So even for generations still unborn, we will live in song.
Wow. So she really recognizes what Zeus did to her, or like kind of set out for her life.
Yes. And what I really admire about Helen, and people say this about Penelope all the time, Odysseus' wife, is that she's always engaged in the art of weaving and unweaving. Helen also does a lot of feminine arts. She is aware of the arts in a way that some of the other characters in the book aren't. So she talks about the fact that their legacy will live on in song. And we're talking about the Iliad right now in 2026. So her legacy has lived on.
Very much so.
She's weaving, right? She's seen weaving and embroidering, and she's making these kind of relics of their legacy. And it's not good, but she seems attuned to the fact that what will be left is what people will remember, which is that Helen was known for her beauty, Paris and Helen caused the war, and they caused this doom.
But yet she's also remembered as, like, for the most part, like most of our texts, it's easy to look at and say, she was not really willing participant in this. She was like kind of dragged along. So like even in all of this, in her terribleness, like she is also remembered as a victim as well.
Yeah, and I think that's the hard part with Helen, is that her characterization has changed so much as well. We see her as a victim. We see her as like a catalyst. We see her as someone who willingly chose to go. And it's ancient writers say one thing, but they also change their mind. Contemporary writers write something else. The Iliad obviously portrays her in this way, but we see her in later texts and in earlier texts in different ways. So it's really hard to know what is Helen and what is her story. And the way the Iliad, because we've talked about this a lot, for a book about the Trojan War, the Iliad and the Odyssey don't really talk about the Trojan War. It starts with the rage of Achilles over Agamemnon, and it ends with the death of Hector. So we don't see the Trojan horse. We don't see Helen's kidnapping. We only hear about it, which a lot of contemporary scholars think implies that Homer was aware that people knew the story of Helen and Paris. People knew the story of the Trojan horse. People knew these things, so he didn't need to say them. Like, they were long established folklore characters. But what can be said is that Helen seems to have a very, very loving relationship with Hector, more so than any of her brother-in-laws, and more so than even her husband. And as a result, unfortunately, Hector's death shakes her to her core. Spoilers, Hector dies.
Girl, how dare you?
So we all know the infamous scene of Achilles not wanting to fight, and so him and the Myrmidons don't fight. Agamemnon, Menelaus, Odysseus, they all know that without Achilles, this war is not going to be won. Because if you remember from the earlier prophecies, it was said that this war would be won with Achilles.
Mm-hmm.
So Achilles' fellow soldier, friend, the person he grew up with, lover in some cases, Patroclus, he ends up wearing Achilles' armor and he is cut down by Hector. And this brings Achilles back into the war. And so he hunts down Hector, cuts him down, and refuses to release his body. And this leads to a very emotional scene where Priam comes to beg for it back. So Priam arrives with the help of the gods, especially with the help of Hermes, and he speaks to Achilles and he asks him to let him take his son and bury his body. And their conversation is very, very emotional. I think Priam is very genuine in the fact that he just wants his son, the hero of Troy, to be given passage to the underworld, which he can't do if his body is left to rot, like Achilles is leaving it. And Achilles' wrath is not like Heracles', where it's red and he can't look past it. He does agree. And he does agree to hold the Greeks back for 12 days while the Trojans hold the funeral rites for Hector. And this part, there is something about Hector's death that always gets to me. In the movies, in the books, in the Iliad, in songs, in plays, in everything I've seen, every time Hector dies, I'm gone. And it's because there's something, you know what, like when in a movie, when the music swells,
Mm-hmm.
there's something about listening to all of the different members of Hector's family talk about his death and talk about him that feels like the music is swelling inside me. Hector was, in all sense of the word, a hero. He fought for Troy. He had a young baby. He brought honor to his name. And if you don't know, I am obsessed with Epic the Musical by Jorge Rivera Herons, and he's coming out with Iliad. And he has this refrain that it might not be in the full version, but the refrain is about the pride of Troy, and I'm like, he's talking about Hector, it's gonna get me, I'm gonna be sobbing.
Aww.
So Priam brings his son back, and he returns to Troy unnoticed by everyone except his daughter Cassandra. And she's in the towers and she starts crying out for everyone to hear that Hector is home, the greatest joy of Troy and all its people. And then we see the women start to cry out. And first, his wife leads the songs of sorrow. His mother sings songs of sorrow. And then Helen is allowed to sing a song of sorrow. To me, it just cements that relationship between Helen and Hector, and Helen and the gravity of what she's done. And it's also the last song. So in the beginning, the Iliad starts with Sing Goddess, and it's about the Song of Troy. And Helen is the one who ends the Song of Troy. And in a way, it's very symbolic because she physically ends Troy. Her appearance in Troy is what leads to its downfall. Namely, I mean, it's Paris, but Helen is kind of the catalyst of it all. And I'm going to read this in like one of the translations I found that I really love, because it kind of gives you an idea of what Helen is thinking. So she says, Hector, dearest to me of all my husband's brothers, my husband Paris, magnificent as a god, he was the one who brought me here to Troy. Oh, how I wish I died before that day. But this now is the 20th year for me since I sailed here and forsook my own native land. Yet never once did I hear from you a taunt and insult, but if someone else in the royal halls would curse me, one of your brothers or sisters or brothers' wives, trailing their long robes, even your own mother, not your father, always kind as my own father, why, you'd restrain them with words, Hector. You'd win them to my side, and with your gentle temper, all your gentle words. And so, in the same breath, I mourned for you and me, my doom-struck, hallowed heart. Now there is no one left in the wide realm of Troy, no friend to treat me kindly. All the countrymen cringe from me in loathing. And with this, the funeral of the great Hector is how the Iliad ends. And again, this idea that Helen is always dabbling in some way in the arts, in legacy. She weaves, she embroiders, she sings, she talks about poetry. Mm-hmm. She's very aware that this is what is going to be left of Troy. But you might be thinking, if that's how the Iliad ends, where's the Trojan horse? What happens to Helen? What happens with the big fight at the end?
Exactly.
And so this is a big thing that when I first read the Iliad, I was like, wait, where's the horse?
Where's the rest of it?
I'm aware that there was a horse in this story.
It's the one thing we all know.
Yeah, the Trojan War, the Trojan horse, like those two things are synonymous. Like we're like, where is it? So this is the thing about the Iliad. The Iliad does not really cover all of these details that we think it covers. We learn a lot of it from the Odyssey, when characters retell the stuff that happened during the later parts of the Trojan War. But the Trojan War was one big fanfic contest. People were writing plays left and right about Helen, about Clytemnestra, about the Trojan women, about Hector, about Paris's death, about like letters that Helen apparently wrote to Paris. It was one big fanfiction cesspool, I'm going to say. People were writing everything. There are some stories that are more popular than others, and so we'll focus on those. Otherwise, we'll be going through fan fiction for the rest of our lives. So one story about what happens to Helen comes from a play called The Trojan Women. But before we get to that, let's talk about Paris's death.
Yes, let's do it.
Paris does eventually kill Achilles with the help of Apollo, but he also then dies after being struck with a poisoned arrow. Early sources don't really show this moment or what happens after, but we do have some sources like Quintus Semiranis's Post-Homerica, where he tells us that after being hit by the poisoned arrow, Paris flees to his first wife, the nymph, Ione, and he says to her, I widowed you a long time ago, but I didn't do it out of my own will. The fates dragged me to Helen, and, I wish that I had died before I did that. But could you please save me? And she says no. She says, you made your bed, now lie in it. And so Paris dies on Mount Ida. And do you think Helen is free? No. She is taken in by one of Paris's brothers. And this is not done with her consent. Or we really don't know if it was done with anyone's consent. I think he just decides he's marrying her. And it was between his brothers Helenus and Deiphobus, of which one is going to marry Helen, and Deiphobus wins. We hear later on that Odysseus came into the city dressed as a beggar, and Helen recognized him. And so she, took care of him, gave him a bath, not like in that sense, but like organized a bath and stuff for him, and then asked him to tell her their plans, what the Greeks were going to do. And he told her. And she told him that she was sorry for the blindness that Aphrodite brought and that she was ready to go home. She wanted to go to her child, her bridal room, her husband. But once Odysseus leaves, after telling her the plot of the Trojan horse and what the Greeks were planning, she does something odd and kind of out of character. So in the Odyssey, Menelaus recounts to us how when they were inside the horse, Helen approached it and began calling out to each warrior in the voice of their wife.
Oh, that's weird.
So she walked around the horse 3 times, and she called to the different men with the voices of their wives. So she would use Penelope's voice to call to Odysseus. She would use Clytemnestra's voice to call to Agamemnon and a couple of other men. And some of the men were tempted to call out because this is the first time in a long time they're hearing the voices of their wives. But it's Odysseus that stops them and tells them it's a trick. And Menelaus as well. He doesn't hold this against Helen, which is crazy because you'd be thinking, she really doesn't want us to win. She knows we're in here. She's trying to get us to reveal ourselves. And then the Trojans will kill us. But Menelaus thinks that it's some god who had ordered her to do it or made her do it. Which would make sense because Aphrodite's right there.
Honestly, yeah. I would believe that more. Aphrodite. Because also, how does she know the voices of these women?
So it's mimicry. So Aphrodite is known in some other myths to be able to disguise herself and to mimic really well. And so the idea is that it's Aphrodite acting within Helen, or forcing Helen to do this, or it's a skill that she has Helen do, and that it's Athena that guides Helen away afterwards. Because this is obviously, like, the gods are definitely involved in this. It's just which god and why.
Yeah.
However, during the actual sack of Troy, she apparently hid her husband's swords and pointed the way to his rooms. And so it's very confusing, like, whose side is she on, you know? And this leads us to The Trojan Woman. So this is a play by Euripides, and it's about the fate of the notable women after the fall of Troy. The former princesses and even Queen Hecuba are all being held separately from the other women to be carted off to different men. So after a city is razed, usually the royal babies will be killed so that they don't come back and, fight. Sometimes they do take them as wards to raise them. And unfortunately, men are killed and women are taken as slaves, including royal women. So Queen Hecuba is to be sent off with Odysseus. Princess Cassandra is claimed as a concubine by Agamemnon. And Hector's widow, Andromache, whose baby has just been, thrown off the walls of Troy, is given as a concubine to Achilles' son. And amongst them was a woman. And this woman was Helen.
Geez, like, I'm getting some deja vu here in a way. Like, don't we all know that, like, Helen was, like, the source of the conflict the first time? Maybe we just leave this one alone.
Yeah, the Trojan women are not happy to see Helen there. They blame her for what's happening to them. They blame it all on her and her lust and her craziness and the fact that all of the men are dead. Priam is dead. Hector is dead. All of Hecuba's kids are all dead. Her daughters have either been raped or murdered, or Cassandra's right there about to be sent off to be someone's concubine. This is a royal house, and they've been reduced to nothing. Their city has been reduced to ash. So, general sentiment around Helen is not great. And Helen is being held with them because she is going to be taken to Sparta and condemned to death. So all this fighting for Helen, and when it's time for her to be claimed, Menelaus wants her dead. But when Menelaus arrives, Helen argues with him, and she makes the case that her death would be unjust. And if you thought she took digs at her mother-in-law before, she takes digs now at everybody. She blames Hecuba for birthing Paris. She blames Priam for not making sure the baby was actually dead. She blames Menelaus for leaving his wife at home with a stranger. And she says, if you really want to go after someone, go after Aphrodite, the goddess of love. She caused all of this. Go take a stand against the gods if you really want justice. She even adds that once Paris was dead, the guards can attest that she was constantly trying to escape and come to the Greeks, but she was forced to marry his brother instead, and she was stuck. And then Hecuba goes on to argue that Helen is a liar. She's a dirty liar, and she's trying to get Menelaus to fall for her again. And she warns Menelaus, and she says, if you step foot into the same boat as her, you'll be gone. You're going to go back into her bed. And then none of this will matter. This entire war will be for nothing. My kids will be dead for nothing. You'll go back with Helen, and Helen will be queen of Sparta again, and everything will be fine in your little household. So don't let her onto the same boat as you. And Menelaus is like, oh my God, thank you for the advice. I will not step on the same boat as her. But as we know from the Odyssey and from later stories, he does step foot in the same boat as Helen, and they are restored as man and wife. And in some cases, all it takes is Helen dropping her veil to remind Menelaus that she's the most beautiful woman on earth and that she's his wife. In some cases, she drops her top, and that's all it takes. But
what does she need to drop?
I like the Trojan woman one best because she argues and she makes her case. Mm-hmm. And she makes a good case. She's like, why should I die?
Honestly.
Because all of you kept fighting for stupid things. Like, the Trojans could have let me go. That's on them. You should have stayed home, to be honest. Like, what were you doing in Crete?
Mm-hmm.
And then later on, we see in the Odyssey, at one point, Odysseus' son, Telemachus, sails to Sparta to get news of his father, because the Odyssey is all about how Odysseus ends up being trapped at sea for a really long time for making Poseidon mad, and having hubris. But Telemachus sails to Sparta to see if they know where his dad is, because everyone else has come home at this point except for Odysseus. And they all start talking about the war. And again, we see Helen is weaving, and they all talk about the war. And she ends up giving the men a potion, which is said to lighten grief. And there's a line that people believe that Helen must be some kind of divine or goddess or dabble in some kind of magic of some kind, because she's able to give this potion away. Either way, from this, we know that Helen is settled. She's home. She's with her husband and her daughter, and she is queen. And so Menelaus has wholeheartedly taken her back, and her family has wholeheartedly welcomed her back. And eventually, we do learn that Helen and Menelaus end up in the Elysian Fields, and he is told that he's only there because he's married to Helen. And this is the fields where all the heroes go, and you're thinking, oh, why is Menelaus there? Like, he's married to Helen. She's the real hero.
Wait, if all it takes is to be married to Helen, is Paris there as well?
Yeah. I don't think Paris is there because I don't think she chose him is the idea.
That's fair. But you would not think, with everything Helen had to go through, you would not expect like a happy ending for her. That's crazy.
No. And this is what a lot of people are mad about. Like, I think a lot of later writers argue that why does everyone get a happy, like a really bad ending except for Helen? She just gets to live with her life.
Because she didn't do anything. She was just like tossed about like a flower.
No. I mean, there are some writers who are really mad about the fact that Helen gets a happy ending. So in a lot of texts, you'll see that Helen gets attacked after coming back to Sparta. In some, one of her friends whose husband goes off to war and he dies. She invites Helen over and then they stone Helen. So Helen has a lot of different endings. In one of my favorite, just out of nowhere alternate reality ones, it's said that Helen and Achilles are said to drink together and are engaged in singing and celebrating their desire for each other on Snake Island or White Island. And in this story, Achilles didn't actually die during the Trojan War. He was spirited away by his mom and sent to this island to basically enjoy life and come up with poetry. And Helen was taken there afterwards as well, and that's where they live. So that's an alternative idea.
That's really funny too.
So Helen gets a happy ending, but there is still something we have to backtrack to a little bit because we still have the curse of the Atreides.
Oh, yes. That curse.
Mm-hmm. So this is the curse that follows the family of Agamemnon and Menelaus. And if you remember, we still have Helen's sister, Clytemnestra, to deal with because she has been waiting a long, long time for Agamemnon to come home. And she's been praying that he doesn't die at war because she wants to be the one to take care of him.
Right.
So the most famous version of this story is from the Odyssey, and these are 3 books: Agamemnon, Libation Bearers, and the Eumenides. So in Agamemnon, and it's also mentioned in the Odyssey, when Odysseus goes to the underworld and he sees the ghost of Agamemnon, he's like, wait, we won the war. What are you doing here? And Agamemnon's like, well, my welcome home wasn't great. So Cassandra, the princess of Troy, whose prophecies were cursed to never be believed, was claimed by Agamemnon as a concubine and a war prize. And so she had a vision, and she knew exactly what was going to be waiting for them when they got to Agamemnon's home. And she was excited. So when the King of Kings, Agamemnon, returns triumphant to his home, he is welcomed lovingly into his wife's arms. For 10 years, he has not seen Clytemnestra, and he thinks that in those 10 years, she has forgotten and forgiven him for the death of their daughter, Iphigenia. To recap, before the Greeks could set sail, they had to appease Artemis by sacrificing Agamemnon's daughter, and because Clytemnestra came with her daughter because she thought that she was going to get married to Achilles. Instead, she was killed. So Agamemnon's thinking, wow, my wife has definitely gone over that. Meanwhile, Clytemnestra's thinking, I can't wait to kill this man. And to make matters worse, while he was away in Troy, Aegetus, his cousin, had begun a love affair with his wife, and they were plotting his death together.
Ooh, partner in crime.
Yeah. So she welcomes Agamemnon home, and she advises him to go have a long, hot bath to relax after his journey. And he agrees. He's like, yeah, I've come a long way. I was on a boat. I was in a war camp for ages. I could use a good hot bath. Mm-hmm. Except while he's soaking, Clytemnestra comes into the room and she throws this weighted net over him, and it traps him in the water. He's confused and he's starting to thrash around, and she stabs him over and over and over again.
You know, who needs poison or anything subtle like that? The new woman's weapon is a net and a spear.
Yep.
I like
a net,
this.
And then just straight stab to death, like a fish.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
At this point, Cassandra runs in, and she knows what's going to happen. So the idea here is that she knows that if she comes into this room, Clytemnestra is going to kill her, and she does. She ends up getting stabbed. And then Clytemnestra and Aegetus end up running the kingdom for a while. So at the time, the young son of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra, he fled. And he ends up coming back in the second book, Libation Bearers. And to get revenge for his dad's death, he has to kill his mom and her lover. However, you can't really just go around killing your mother. And so it's kind of like Hamlet. In order to get revenge for one unclean deed, you have to commit an unclean deed yourself, and then you've done something else that's bad. And so he has to kill his mom to avenge his father. And because that's matricide, the Furies are sent after him, and they hunt him down to the ends of the earth. They follow him everywhere. Eventually, Athena does take pity on him, and she sets up the first courtroom drama. So Athena was the first Judge Judy, and he has to answer for his crimes. And in a very, unbiased way, Athena ends up being the one to cast the final vote, and she decides that he shouldn't be killed. And with this, the curse of the Atreides comes to an end, and order is restored to the world. Woo! And then, of course, there's the Odyssey, but we can't get into that because that man is still somewhere in the ocean looking for a way home to Ithaca, and that will have to be a different story, a different timeline, a different 10-part series. But for now, that is the end of the Trojan War.
The thing I didn't know I was going to need after hearing this story was a Law and Order style show. Athena is the judge, and you've got like minor deities or whatever being like defense and the prosecution, and they go through crazy things for these cases. High drama. Everyone's kind of related. I need this show now.
Yes, I would love to see just the Greek gods go at each other in like a jury style courtroom where they have to argue, but also they should also be put on trial.
Yeah.
Like Aphrodite, straight to jail. Not even like a double, like just straight to jail.
Well, I feel like that is like the season end thing, because like that would be a huge undertaking to actually charge a god, right? So that'd be the undertone for the whole season.
Yeah.
You start off defending or like prosecuting like random people, and then in like mid-season, we've got like a minor deity. Like that's pretty huge. And then at the end they're like, Aphrodite's behind it all. We gotta go after her. Don't.
Turns out it was Zeus all along, or Aphrodite, or Hera. But yeah, so that is the 3-part conclusion to the Trojan War. We started off talking about Helen, and we ended off talking about her sister Clytemnestra. And Helen and Clytemnestra and Penelope, their cousin, they tend to be brought up over and over and over again in these Trojan War stories as different sides of women perception, right? So Helen is seen as more of like someone who's full of lust, and she caused this war because of her desires. But in the actual stories, you see that she doesn't really show a lot of that. Ovid aside, because he writes these weird letters that she wrote to Paris about how much she thought he was beautiful and how she couldn't be, she was so stainless and pure, but, if he wanted to, he could. Clytemnestra, obviously the angry mother. She is someone who has to take revenge for her daughter, and so she ends up becoming an adulterer herself. And all of this comes back to that curse that Aphrodite may or may not have put on Tyndareus, where it said that his daughters were going to be adulterers and they were going to end up forsaking their husbands, and it came to pass. In some cases, Helen ends up with 5 husbands. Theseus, if we count that, and because it matters if he, in some stories he doesn't actually do anything, he drops her off with his mom, but in some cases he does. So her 5 husbands would have been Theseus, Menelaus, Paris, the The other guy, the one that she married very briefly, and then Menelaus again.
Yeah, I love it. And that other guy.
Well, it's the brother of Paris, and I can barely remember his name.
No, he's such a footnote. I get it.
Delaphobus or something like that.
Do you want me to hand you a spear and or net?
You know she would have killed Paris herself if she could. I feel like Clytemnestra and Helen were like one bad day away. If Clytemnestra was also being watched by a god, I feel like she wouldn't have done it. But
yeah, I feel like if those letters were accurate, they were like the 20th attempt after writing like, I'm going to kill you and I hate you. And then it's like finally like, okay, gotta get it together. Gotta get it together.
Oh my god, I love you. It's like the forced little one.
Yeah, it's just like head banging against the wall. Like, Aphrodite, stop it.
Stop telling me to write I love him. I hate him. He doesn't smell like flowers.
Yeah. Or she wrote for her actual husband and then Aphrodite came along and just like scratched out like the names. It's just like, yeah.
And so I feel like we've left off on this perfect dichotomy of the maiden and the temptress. You know, was Helen without any agency and simply a prize to be won? Was she actively seeking satisfaction and love over all else? Was she even there at all? Or was she really in Egypt while her likeness went to Troy, as is in some cases of the story? It's really, really hard to say. Helen is beautiful without a doubt. However, the descriptions of her during the war are blood-chilling horror Helen, that deathless goddess Helen. And Helen herself calls herself so many names. And so it does really make you think the face that launched 1,000 ship, implies that she caused the war, just like Eve is always blamed for eating the apple first. And so women constantly take this role of bearing the burden of accountability. And in some cases, it does seem like she was set up to fail. Her husband had a curse. Her father put a curse on them. Aphrodite was after her. And so she was just trapped in this sense. But at the same time, maybe she was a woman who made a choice and she chose to leave with Paris, and then she had to live with that choice and she felt the regret of it. Either way, they brought forth untold calamities and horrors to the men of Greece and Troy. And so we have these two sisters who kind of bring an end to the Greek men and to the Trojan men. And so what are your thoughts on that? Like, do you think it changes anything at all hearing the end of the war? If she chose to do it, if she didn't choose to do it? Do you think Helen left willingly? Is always the question I come back to at the end of anything about the Trojan War.
I don't think she left like with complete free will. I don't think she fell in love with Paris. And it doesn't track with anything else we've seen of her. I can't believe that. Yeah, no, I don't. I'm trying to even think of a way to look at it where this was her decision. And I really don't see it. Like, she keeps talking about her husband and her daughter like a lot. And I think if it was her decision and she was like really feeling that shame, I think I would have thought she would have just wanted away from everything. Like, well, I already got out of that. It's not going to be good going back there because I clearly betrayed them. The feeling that she can go back and like make that connection again, it makes it feel like, well, she's very confident in the fact that this was not something she wanted in the first place.
Yeah.
But that's just me.
Yeah, I mean, that's why the story is so intriguing, right? It's like everything was caused because of this one moment, and we don't even know if that moment was consensual or not consensual, or if it was, we have no idea, right? So we have no idea what the story, like how the story goes, to be honest. So travelers, please let us know what you think of this story. Do you think that Helen went willingly? Do you also hate Paris and we should start a Paris hate club? And in general, what did you think of the 3-part series? You can always reach out to us on any social media sites. We are at From Enchanted or under the podcast name on sites like Bluesky. You can also find us on our website, www.talesfromenchantedforest.com, where we'll be putting up these show notes and probably some family trees so you can stare at them for a really long time. Or if you're old school like Sparrow, you can always email us at talesfromenchantedforest@gmail.com. We would love to hear your questions, comments, and suggestions. So don't hesitate to reach out to us.
And remember, there's always a place for you in the Enchanted Forest.